Hello, my name is Daniel and today I'm going to be publishing my review of La Sportiva's TX4 approach footwear, which I've owned and have been using for the last 2 years. Now, whether you're thinking of buying the boot version, the low cut boot version, or the shoe version, I hope that you'll find this review insightful. Now, I've completed many hundreds of miles of hiking and scrambling en route, mostly around Snowdon and the Glideri in Snowdonia, but also more locally on footpaths and around forests and so forth. Up in Snowdon, I've done quite a few scrambling routes as well, including Sentries Ridge, as you can see here. I've also been up Dolman Ridge. I've also put this footwear through its paces in some absolutely awful weather, including Bryant's Gully, as you can see here in the sopping wet. So I really have put these boots through their paces over the last 2 years. Okay, so I'll just start off with a few features that you'll find on this footwear. You have a rand protection which goes all the way around the lower part of the boot. There's also a reinforced toe box at the front, as you can see here, just for some extra protection. I will say that this is a wide-soled boot, and that is compared to my latest footwear that I've purchased, which is Saliwa Wildfire shoes. Have a look here, you can see that the TX4s are a full centimetre wider. That is the tread, the sole is a full centimetre wider. That is quite a lot. I've also found them very lightweight compared to my old leather boots, which I still have and occasionally wear around. You will find with La Sportivas, they have made quite a weight saving on the upper part of the boot. They have suede leather on there, but it is fairly thin and fairly lightweight. Now, the La Sportiva TX4 version I have is the GTX version. GTX stands for GoreTex, which is essentially a waterproof liner or sock that goes inside the boot. This is a completely optional. You can go for the standard version if you want. Now, the laces on this boot are fairly thin, but they do go fairly far down towards the toe. So even though it is a fairly roomy boot, you can tighten it up and close that space off and get a snug fit in there, nearly all the way down to the toe, as you can see here. Now, one of the best things about this boot is the dotted lugs on the sole. These are Vibram's Mega Grip, and they're the dotted lugs, and they are absolutely brilliant, but more about those in a moment. So I read online that a few people had said you need to go up half a size with these boots. I went up half a size and I'd say they're actually not a bad fit at all. I've never felt that they were overly tight. I've never felt that they were like too loose, as in ridiculously loose. A couple of times, because they have stretched a little bit when they've got wet, I have had to tighten up the laces just to keep my feet snug in there. But half a size up was about right for me. Okay, wearing them in, I didn't have any blisters at all. I just went straight out on the mountains and did a full day. I didn't bother sort of walking them in on a short walk or anything like that. I didn't have any blisters, no sore feet. I've never had any issues like that at all with them. I've just managed to go out literally out of the box on my feet, out into the mountains, and no issues at all. Okay, so onto the sole, which is probably like the most important part of this boot. As I mentioned before, you have Vibram's Mega Grip dotted lugs on there. Now, these are really shallow. As you can see here, I'm showing you these lugs here. They're really shallow, they're not very deep. So that means that they stick really well to the rock. You also have this flat area at the front of the boot, which is perfect for getting a maximum amount of traction onto the rock. So overall, I would say this entire front section of the boot here is really designed for going on rock. You've also got a heel here and irregular shaped lugs on the back of the boot, which obviously is going to act as like a brake if you're coming downhill on grass or mud. You do have a bit of a braking action in this boot. It's not a completely flat sole, so the front of the sole is definitely good for going up on rock and absolutely brilliant. I cannot recommend it enough for going on rock. As you see from some of the clips here, I'm putting myself into some quite precarious positions, and I really am putting a lot of faith in these TX4s, and they've never failed me after 2 years. So really sticky going up on rock, and you do have the heel there, which gives you a bit of a braking action when you come down the mountain on the other side on whatever sort of terrain there is there. Okay, so the rand and the toe box that stops obviously sharp objects from damaging or cutting into your feet. I've had no problems with these at all over the last 2 years. They're not super thick, like really clunky, but there's just enough protection there to keep out any of the sharp objects. I've got to say, I've never really been out on a hike or a scramble or a walk and ever felt that there was any sort of pain around my toes or anything digging in on the side of the boot. So for the Rand and the toe box, I definitely give that a thumbs up. As I mentioned before, the top of the boot is made from suede leather and it's fairly thin, so there isn't a ton of protection on the top of the boot, but again, they've made that thin to keep the weight down. So this is one of those boots where there is a bit of a compromise there. They have used lighter weight materials on there to keep the weight down, but you've got the protection where you need it most, obviously the toe box and the Rand. Again, I've had no problems with the suede leather. None of it has failed, none of it is torn, none of it is ripped, nothing like that. And as you've already seen, I've been out in all sorts of weather conditions. So 2 years in, no issues with these suede uppers. Okay, so the laces are quite thin on these. They're probably the thinnest laces I've ever had on a pair of hiking boots, and they do come undone quite easily, which is fine for me. If I need to loosen off the laces or even tighten them up, they do pull through quite easily, but they're just not super thick. I'll be honest, when I first looked at this footwear, I thought they looked a little bit flimsy, but hey, I'm 2 years in, nothing is torn, nothing is frayed, nothing is broken. I'm really happy with the lacing system on these boots, and that's 2 years in. Okay, the GoreTex, it's a little bit like Marmite, isn't it? You know, some people love GoreTex, some people hate it. For me, I've got to be honest, I'm not a massive fan because I've never had a pair of boots or shoes with the GoreTex has lasted as long as the actual footwear. So on these, the TX4s, they were dry in all weather conditions for the first year, and then I think the left boot went first, started letting water in, then the right boot went and that started letting water in. But that isn't a criticism of La Sportiva TX4s, that is more of a criticism of GoreTex, because it's happened on every footwear that I've ever owned. That is the price you pay with GoreTex. You get that wear and tear in there, that constant movement of your feet inside the boot. The boot's obviously moving with every step and it just wears out the GoreTex. Again, not an issue that is specific to La Sportiva TX4s, just generally GoreTex, you know, in general. Okay, moving on from GoreTex, I just want to mention that my feet do sometimes feel a little bit hot in these boots. I'm not sure if that's down to the GoreTex, which is breathable, but obviously does reduce breathability to a certain degree, or it could be the leather uppers. I'm not sure which one it is, but I do sometimes find in the summer, my feet do feel a little bit hot and sweaty compared to some of my other footwear. Now, that might not be an issue for you, but I know that some people are really sensitive to having hot feet, so I felt that it's worth mentioning that. Okay, so the stiffness and the general sort of firmness of the boot and the sole. I'll start off with the ankle. This is a mid-cut boot. It doesn't offer any rigid support. I'm a firm believer that if you have, you know, weak ankles or you're prone to your ankle rolling over, if you need some sort of ankle protection, you're going to need something as rigid as ski boots. And the La Sportiva TX4s are the complete opposite. They are as flexible and as soft as a pair of trainers. They offer protection from grazing and from getting cut and rocks or whatever hitting your ankles and the lower part of your leg, but it's not going to offer any support for your ankle rolling over, and it's certainly not going to firm up your ankle or anything like that. Moving on to the actual boot itself, there is absolutely no rigid qualities to this at all. If you have a look at me bending the boot every way and which way loose here, as you can see. Now what this means is when I'm edging, I really have no support. If I'm trying to just, you know, hang on a little ledge on a rock somewhere with just a toe or the side of my foot, there really isn't a lot of support there at all. However, when it comes to smearing, which is trying to get as much of the sole, as much of the tread in contact with the rock as possible, I do find that these TX4s are absolutely brilliant. I would go as far as to say that they are the best scrambling boots I've ever owned, because they are so sticky. Those lugs are brilliant on rock, and it's a nice flexible boot, so you can really get as much of that tread in contact with the rock as possible. Obviously, if you have boots that are really firm, then you're not going to get as much of that tread. It's not going to mold around the rock. So the compromise is these boots, the TX4s, are just not very good at edging. There's no support there. They're super flexible, but they are brilliant at smearing, and that's what I tend to do most of the time when I'm scrambling. If I'm on a steep section of rock, I want to get as much of that sole in contact with the rock as possible. So I'm not really looking for a super firm boot, not in the summer. And for me, the TX4s are absolutely perfect, but you do need to know they're just not great at edging because they're just so flexible. Now I love my TX4s, and as I've said, I use them mostly on scrambling routes, but also on hiking routes, on paths and things like that. I've been up and down Snowdon and the nearby mountains many dozens of times in these and had no problems at all. But if you have a look at the sole here, as I mentioned before, you have these rounded lugs, but if you look at the TX5, which is the next shoe up in the range, you can see it has a completely different pattern on the sole, on the lugs there on the sole. And the reason for that is the TX4 is really built for going up rock. You can see that with those nice shallow rounded lugs, but the TX5 has a much more aggressive tread profile, and what that means is the TX5 is more of a general hiking boot. In other words, if you were spending a lot of time going on wet grass, uphill or downhill, you're probably better off getting something like the TX5. But if you're spending more time on rock, especially going up rock like I do, I consider myself to be a scrambler, you would probably want the TX4 because those shallow rounded lugs are super sticky and they just stick to that rock like glue. Okay, so wear and tear. I'm 2 years in and I'm still wearing these boots, which is great considering the mileage that I put them in. I was actually quite impressed. Sometimes when you look at sort of lightwear footwear like this, you know, you always worry, is there a compromise that's been made? Are they going to fall apart because, you know, the manufacturer has tried to keep the weight down? Well, I am 2 years in and there's hardly any wear and tear on these. Really, the only notable wear and tear is the sole has started to come a little bit loose on the edges of the boot, if I show you that here. But again, it's not actually interfering with my walking or scrambling at the moment, and it's actually been doing this for, I'd say, probably the last sort of 2 months. So it hasn't come off yet, the sole hasn't come off, but it's starting to come a little bit loose. I think I've probably got another couple of months out of these boots and then I'll need to go and replace them. So that's it. That pretty much concludes my review of La Sportiva's TX4. I think the big question is, would I buy them again? Well, the truth is, because I own a YouTube channel, I want to do reviews of all the products that I buy, so I'm going to be buying different footwear, but only for that reason. If I didn't have the YouTube channel, I would probably buy these again, but I might consider the shoe version just to keep down on the weight, and I probably wouldn't bother with the GoreTex version either because it just failed after a year anyway. And I think not having the GoreTex in there might just improve the breathability of the boot a little bit better, and my feet won't get so hot in there. But overall, I'm really happy with these boots, and I definitely recommend them for anybody that's doing scrambling or spending time on rock. If you're somebody who's doing a bit more, you know, on the hiking side of things, and you think you're going to be going up and down wet grassy hills more often, I think you should look at the TX5 simply because it has a more aggressive profile on the lugs there, and it will just give you a little bit more traction on that sort of terrain. So that concludes my review. Thank you for watching. If you've enjoyed this video, do hit the like button, and of course, if you have a question about La Sportiva's TX4s, do leave a comment in the comment section below the video. As I say, I've owned them for 2 years. There's a good chance I'll be able to give you an accurate answer. Again, thank you for watching.